Welcome everyone to this special Associated Country Women of the World webinar marking such an important day as International Day of Rural Women. Today's event will be indeed part of ACWW's continuing work to champion the voices and well-being of rural women across the world. And we're so pleased to have you with us. I am Nicoletta Idili, your host for this webinar. I am the Communications Officer at ACWW, and I'm very excited to be joined today by our guest speaker. So today with us, we have Dr. Clara O'Reilly, cognitive behavior therapist, who will share her insight on mental health, managing stress, and supporting emotional well-being, especially in rural context. With us as well, we will have Dr. Louise Newlands, general practitioner and GP educator based in London. Today, Dr. Louise will talk about women's health with particular focus on heart health and ways to promote women's health. Just a reminder of what's happening today on this important day. We not only have this special webinar, but following straight after at 3 p.m. UK time, which will be about 30 minutes after this webinar, is ACWW celebration, which you don't want to miss out, I'm sure. And if you haven't registered yet, you can do so by clicking on the screen on the flyer of the event, or you will have the link in the chat. So the focus for today, as mentioned, will be rural women's health. In particular, we're going to be looking at heart wellness, mental health, and overall women well-being. During the presentations by our guest, feel free to share your questions. You can write any comments, questions, reflections you have in the chat, and I promise you that I will pick them up towards the end of this webinar on our Q&A session. But without further ado, I say we can start. So I ask to Dr. Clara, I hand it over to you for your presentation, and I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Nicoletta, for that introduction. Bear with me one moment while I share my screen. And yeah, we can start to kind of think about well-being, mental health, and how we can prioritize and yeah, really foster that within us. During the kind of presentation, I will turn off my camera, just so I guess there's no interruptions. But as Nicoletta mentioned, at the end of our session today, I'll be more than happy to take any questions. And yeah, maybe we can think together about what could be helpful. So let's get going. So yeah, again, I just kind of want to thank you so much for allowing me to take part today, and celebrate the amazing work that you do as rural women across the world. As kind of introduced, my name is Clara. I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist based in the UK, but originally from quite a rural area, kind of in Ireland, as you may have noticed by my accent. And yeah, today I'll be speaking about mental health and well-being. So the presentation I've prepared is a mixture of both information and practical tools that you could use going forward. And I've also prepared kind of a few resources that we'll be sending through after today, that summarizes the techniques we look at with a couple of additions that, given timing, maybe weren't able to explore. But yeah, kind of the approach from which I kind of stem from, so cognitive behavioral therapy, it's very much focused on, empowering you to feel more in control of your well-being. And after our time together today, it's my hope that you'll be able to take away not only maybe greater knowledge of what impacts well-being, but as I mentioned, also tools and techniques that you could use to support yourself in living a happier, more value-driven life. Now, I know this topic can be difficult to discuss, and there is a lot of stigma around mental health across the world, and specifically struggling with our mental health. But it's my hope that from our discussion today, it reminds us that we are all human and we are all going to struggle sometimes, and that is okay. And as women, kind of in rural communities, you face many demands that you need to manage and respond to on a daily basis. So I thought a helpful place to start today would be to consider the different factors which may be impacting your well-being. Some of these may be kind of the work you do, running the home, child rearing, along with additional external stresses like uncertainty around climate, financial insecurity, safety, and isolation. And as human beings, we can only do so much. And when we are trying to manage so many different demands, it's natural that we will struggle. That doesn't mean that we will feel like that forever, but it does mean that we may need to prioritize ourselves and our well-being. But I know when it comes to getting started with this, knowing where to start can be incredibly daunting. And one of the most helpful tools for our well-being kind of arsenal is this roadmap. And this is what we use in CBT to really break down what is happening for us when we are struggling and kind of identifies 5 different areas. And as a result is kind of known as the 5 areas model. Um, what we start with is the situation we're in, where I am, who I'm with, what is going on around me. Feelings. So this is both the emotions that we're feeling, sadness, happiness, stress, but also what our body is telling us, because we know that our body and our emotions are extremely tightly linked. Um, we think about our behaviors as well. What do we do next in a situation? How do we cope? And lastly, our thoughts. So, what's going through our minds? What sense are we making from what's happening for us? And, you know, you might notice kind of from this diagram that there are a couple of different arrows connecting each area and kind of going both ways, as we know that all of these factors can interact and at times feed each other, leaving us feeling really stuck and maybe anxious, stressed, depressed, and stuck in vicious cycles that we don't know how to get out of. But once we kind of are able to understand what's making up our own cycles, we can then use various different techniques to challenge this. Um, I've kind of presented an example of, what this kind of vicious cycle might look like for somebody living, in a kind of rural or kind of farming context. So as you can see in this situation, you know, this person has found out that their crops have failed, and the thoughts that might come up for them is maybe labeling themselves as a failure, feeling like they won't survive this, feeling maybe alone and like they don't know who could help them. Um, in terms of emotions, you can see here sadness, but things like shame, guilt, overwhelm, and really feeling that in the body. So maybe feeling tired, but actually not being able to sleep, losing that appetite as well. Um, and this person, in an attempt to cope with all of these different factors, might end up losing some motivation to kind of prioritize themselves, look after themselves, might be avoiding members of the community because of the feelings of shame they're feeling, and might try to overcompensate by kind of working extra hard, trying to kind of fix, what has gone wrong. Um, but, as we can see from maybe an outside perspective, this is not her fault. Um, Women are incredibly powerful, but even there's certain things that we can't control. And, you know, that is also what can kind of make this tool quite helpful in that it lets us take a step back and see what's happening. Um, and kind of not only kind of I guess getting that real overview, but that can then let us know maybe where it could be helpful to start to break the cycle to make it work better for us or feel a bit more positive. And this is where we can bring in those tools for well-being. So I've included kind of various different ones, two of which we'll look at today. Something kind of behavioral called behavior activation, and something more cognitive or based around our thoughts. And this technique called quite simply thought challenging. Um, and there's some additional things we can do as well around relaxation. Um, Again, this information will be included in the resource that is kind of sent through. And during our time together today, um, I thought it'd be helpful maybe to pinpoint one behavioral and one thought-based one. And again, these are expanded on in those resources. So the first technique we'll look at is behavior activation, and this is focused on disrupting that behavior portion of that kind of 5 areas model. This is especially useful for those who are struggling with sadness, hopelessness, maybe general feelings of overwhelm, but is also really helpful generally in maintaining our well-being. So this technique was kind of developed because research has shown, this connection between what we do and how we feel. And, when we are struggling, perhaps with low mood, that might mean that we are feeling less motivated and procrastinating, maybe avoiding things. When this happens, we typically end up in a place where we're doing more of the have tos and less or none of the want tos. Um, and that means that we can often lose touch with those things that give us value or meaning in our daily lives. And, as a result, that mood kind of continues to spiral and, keeps us locked within that cycle. Um, and, as I mentioned, this isn't only kind of necessarily when we are struggling with our mood specifically, but also maybe if we are, you know, in very busy periods, you know, we can also maybe lose touch with those things that I guess give us that break, that replenish of our energy. And what we aim to do with this kind of technique is to reconnect with those things that we value, and try to find balance between 3 kind of characteristics or types of behavior. These are kind of what we call it kind of ACE, or kind of the ACE principle. Um, and essentially, what we want to bear in mind, when we're filling our kind of our day to day is that we're finding balance between things that bring us achievement, bring us that sense of connection with others, but also with pets, with nature, um, and kind of lastly, enjoyment. So those things that, yeah, just can feel fun or relaxing for us. And, you know, especially when we are in difficult times or stressful times, it is the enjoyment that usually, gets maybe put on the back foot, which for the short term maybe feels necessary, but long term, we know that can really, I guess, bring us down and take us into that maybe lower mood, more stressed place. Um, and something else to bear in mind, about our kind of our ACE is that what one person, sees as an achievement, another person may not. Um, so it's important to be curious, to be open to discovering what these things could look like for you. Um, and understandably, the main barrier when applying this is that you're feeling tired, you're lacking motivation. So understandably, it might feel really hard to kind of to get started. So what I've done is broken it down into a couple of steps to try to make the process a bit easier for you to get going. Um, so first off, getting an overview of what things are looking like, taking note of what you're getting up to, how your mood is feeling, if it's hitting kind of our A or C or our E. Um, After that, we want to reflect and see, is there anything unhelpful there? Things like avoidance, procrastination. Is that balance there between ACE? Is there any enjoyment in there? From there, we can then think about what could provide this for us and then start gradually introducing that into our week. You know, it can feel really hard to go from, 0 to 100. So giving yourself that patience to slowly build and, try things. And when it comes to these sorts of techniques, setbacks do happen and things don't go to plan, and that's okay. We just need to, I guess, ask ourselves, what do we think got in the way? Is there something I can do here to change it? Or maybe, is there some outside support that could be helpful? Now, once we're kind of in that routine of getting that value back in, we want to continue checking in with our mood, making adjustments where needed, and continuing to make sure that we're prioritizing not only the achievement, but also the connection and the enjoyment. Um, if we consider the previous example from the 5 areas, this is perhaps how they could apply this technique. So, following the kind of the failing harvest, the mood is feeling low, but perhaps if she gave herself that permission to rest without guilt, maybe spend some time doing crafting, which they enjoy, um, they might feel a little less low, a little bit more motivated. Then the next day, they might attend a women's community group, giving them that sense of connection and, feeding into that sense of motivation. Maybe at that point, they feel like they have a little bit more headspace, start considering, alternative streams of income. Um, with that maybe sense of achievement, there's better sleep, there's further connection, and we continue in that way, moving more towards, a hopeful sense, a even kind of more neutral mood that feels a little bit more manageable. It is kind of important to add in, with this technique, we don't want to ignore and validate that there are real hardships that, we do face. But the hope is that with kind of applying this, um, they feel more able to maybe cope, to function within this and kind of reclaim some of their power, even within these tough and often uncertain circumstances. The next technique is something called thought challenging, and um, yeah, moves and kind of looks at that thought kind of area of our five areas. And sometimes, even though what we're doing is feeling more meaningful, the thoughts we're experiencing within our minds are, really having a powerful impact and keeping us feeling stuck. Um, and, with this technique, quite simply, we want to challenge those thoughts, those automatic thoughts that come up for us in kind of difficult situations. And with this technique, again, we're seeking balance. Sometimes things do go wrong, but we do want to check in with ourselves and see, are my thoughts being fair to me? Are they accurate, even though they might feel like facts? And are they proportional to the situation? Um, and as it says here, this can feel, again, quite daunting. Um, and, it is something that can take some time. But with time and effort, it is very much achievable. So similarly to with our behavior activation, I've broken this down into a couple of different steps that you can kind of bring yourself through. First off, involves identifying what that maybe unhelpful automatic thought kind of is happening, or kind of what it is, when you are in those stressful situations. Um, and maybe thinking a little bit about, how much you believe them, how much they feel like fact in that moment. At this point as well, it can be helpful to think about, am I experiencing any shift in my mood when these thoughts happen? The second step then is considering all the evidence for and against. Again, leaning into that balance. We're not going to perhaps pretend that everything is, you know, sunshine and rainbows all the time. But again, is it fair? Is it proportional? Once we have that evidence, both for and against, we can start to think about, is there an alternative way that I could see this? Something that is a bit more balanced, a bit more fair to my experience, to my responsibility and control as well. Um, and then the last part is reflecting on how you feel after challenging that thought. Um, you know, at the start, it's normal not to feel much of an emotional change once you reach the end of this exercise. Um, but over time, as I mentioned, um, you can reach that point where, you know, we feel that emotional shift, but also it's not something that we have to do on purpose. We naturally challenge those thoughts coming in. And again, here's kind of an example of what that might look like for the kind of the woman that we've been thinking about. So if we take that thought, kind of I failed my family, she says she believes it 95%, so really strong evidence for this. You know, perhaps the crops failed again this season, so maybe this isn't the first time. The family perhaps is struggling financially, and perhaps she is the main person responsible kind of for the farming kind of side of things. But again, considering also the evidence against. So there was a drought that happened and it was widespread. Others were also kind of affected and suffered. Um, she knows that she worked very hard every day, tried everything she could. Um, by nature, farming is unpredictable, and not fully in her control. Her family have kind of maybe challenged that feeling. They've said that she hasn't failed. They know she's doing her best. And also she's still kept the household running under these circumstances. So as we can see here, maybe checking in with how fair is that thought being, how factual is it, and thinking about maybe if there is anything that contradicts it and bring us to maybe a more balanced thought. So, acknowledging that she has worked very hard this season and done all she could while looking after her family. The drought was out of her control and it's not her fault. And, many other farmers are struggling too. So, reaching that place where we're releasing that blame for things that maybe we know are out of our control, but at times, especially when we're stressed, it's hard to I guess release that self-blame. Now, kind of just to, I guess, finish up our time together, and I know kind of taking up a little bit more of your time than perhaps we agreed. But I do want to add that sometimes, even though we are again doing the things that feel more meaningful, maybe challenging those unhelpful thoughts, we may be facing external sources of stress and, struggling to cope with that. And when this happens, it's more important than ever to be kind to ourselves, to acknowledge we're doing our best in, difficult and sometimes dangerous circumstances. Um, and yeah, kind of when it comes to the topic of well-being, you may have noticed that I'm quite able to talk kind of for years about it. So yeah, kind of to avoid keeping you kind of for the rest of the day, I've just added kind of a couple of additional considerations to support overall well-being. Um, including focusing on the basics, meeting those needs, hydration, kind of nourishment, rest, practicing that self-compassion, being kind to yourselves, acknowledging so that you're doing everything that you can. Um, perhaps strong strength from spirituality or religion, using relaxation or kind of grounding techniques, using kind of quick kind of problem solving, safety planning. So this could be managing, personal safety from maybe difficult thoughts you're experiencing, but also perhaps safety from others who may be making you feel threatened in some way. Um, and lastly, seeking support from those around you, both from personal life, like community, but also perhaps healthcare professionals, support workers. Um, and as mentioned, there's kind of a little bit more information about this in the resource that will be sent through. Um, but I guess just to leave you with kind of, I guess, a reminder that we are all unique, and that means sometimes finding what works for us involves a bit of trial and error. Um, and what we've discussed today, they are skills, so they do take time to build, and to get to a point where they feel natural as well. Um, so I guess the most important thing, being patient with yourself as you move through this journey, as you find out what managing your well-being means to you, and I guess getting that ball rolling. Um, and yeah, just always kind of trying to approach yourself and your well-being with curiosity and with compassion. Um, you are doing the best you can. There is a lot of things that are out of our control. But I always say control the controllables, and that often involves, looking after ourselves and, like with the image here, fostering that well-being so it can grow to its fullest potential. Um, thank you so much for yeah, kind of sitting with me and yeah, considering I guess how we might be able to manage well-being.
Thank you so much, Dr. Clara Raleigh. What a great way to start, our webinar, and what a great way to celebrate International Day of Rural Women. I think you gave us very practical elements as well to take away with us and to share with other women in our communities. Thank you so much. I took so many notes. I
No
guess
problem. Thank you so much, Nicoletta. Yeah, it can be really helpful, like I said, in those really stressful times, but also generally just making that space for ourselves and using these techniques. So yeah, I hope, that maybe one or two things could be taken away by our attendees.
Thank you. This was great, Clara. Thank you. And now, because I'm aware of time, I will hand over straight to Dr. Louise. And I should put your presentation up if technology doesn't fail me. Hopefully it won't. Okay, Louise, over to you. You are on mute. Yes, still on mute. Okay.
I've got it. Yeah, so thank you, Nicoletta, and thank you, Clara, for a very interesting talk. So I'm Louise Newlands. I'm a NHS GP based in a fairly deprived part of London. A large proportion of my patients are asylum seekers and refugees who have recently arrived in the UK, and often from rural communities or war-torn areas. So because of that, they often haven't seen a doctor in quite a long time. I also see a lot of women. 51% of the UK population is now female, and as one of two women in female GPs in my practice, I end up seeing over half my consultations are with women. My mother grew up in a village in Guyana in South America from a farming family, so I do have some insight into the challenges of healthcare in rural settings. So today I'm going to focus on women's healthcare, why it's important to address this as a topic, what are the discrepancies between men and women's health, with particular focus on heart health, and what we can do to improve women's healthcare globally. So I'm aware of a lot of data in this talk is talking or referring to biological sex, and there are discrepancies in healthcare for people from the LGBTQ plus community, and that's another very important area, although not the focus of my talk today. Thank you, Nikki. So why is women's healthcare important? So not is it only just simply fair that we know just as much about women's health as men's health. Poor women's health can have a wider impact on society. Women are often carers for young children and elderly relatives. So if they're too unwell to fulfill these caring roles, or indeed need caring for themselves, we often find the involvement of social care being great. And sometimes we see young carers, so children taking time away from their education to care for their family. So Carers UK estimates that there are 6.5 million unpaid carers in the UK and 3.34 million, so well over half of these are women. Women also make up a significant proportion of the workforce. The NHS, which is one of the world's largest employers, have 80% of their staff as women currently. So if women aren't well enough to work, there's also an economic burden. Thank you, Nikki. So this infographic I've taken from the Women's Health Strategy for England. And this I thought was quite nice to share because it shows us the life course of a woman where their healthcare needs change during their life. So we start off with adolescence and early adulthood, where periods might be the main problem, moving into sort of the middle years where pregnancy and maternity care might be more important, and then onto the later years where sort of menopause and perimenopausal health become more relevant. So I thought this was quite nice because at the moment we often practice in a very disease-based focused way of practicing medicine. We want to try and shift that to more health promotion and health prevention. So understanding a woman's life course really helps with that. Thank you, Nikki. So there are significant unmet needs for women's health, which has resulted in a huge disparity of health outcomes between men and women. And the pandemic worsened some of these. Women spend on average a greater proportion of their lives unwell compared to men. Why is this? So firstly, healthcare systems have historically been designed for men by men. There's also been a lack of research on women's specific issues, so things like menopause, miscarriage. There has been more research on maternity, which is obviously very good, but pregnancy is a very small proportion of a woman's life, particularly with there being fewer births per couple now. So really, there needs to be more focus on menstrual cycle problems, and also a focus on the post-reproductive years, so menopause. a lot of research has been, oh, not yet, sorry, Nikki. A lot of research has been on Caucasian men. And that means that some of the treatments have been translated to other groups, including women. But we know the same conditions, such as cardiovascular disease, so heart health, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail soon, presents in very different ways. And we don't know enough about perhaps how treatment regimens could be different for men and women and how they may benefit from that. And also there's a lack of understanding from some healthcare professionals about women's health problems. So a study done by part of the Department of Health and Social Care, where they sent out a survey to women in the UK, looked at how women felt that healthcare had been perceived by healthcare professionals. And 84% of women felt that there were times where their healthcare provider hadn't listened to them. That's a staggering number, and we need to do something to address that. Thank you, Nikki. So cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of mortality in women worldwide. It makes up 35% of all deaths in women, and heart attacks and strokes make up the majority of these. Although heart disease is responsible for more deaths in women than all the cancer combined, most women think that breast cancer is the biggest risk to them. But if you look at the figures on the slide, in 2019, breast cancer caused 666,000 deaths a year. This is much smaller than from cardiovascular disease, which caused 19.8 million deaths in a year, and 8.9 million of these were in women. And this map I thought was interesting. You can see, hopefully where you are, listeners, but that shows the prevalence of cardiovascular disease. This is from 2019 as well, but North America, North Africa and the East Asia, they're really quite high levels of prevalence, with an average of 6,403 cases per 100,000 women. There's a huge number of women affected by cardiovascular disease. Thanks, Nikki. So what is a heart attack? So when blood vessels supplying the heart are diseased, you're at risk of a heart attack. And the top portion of this diagram shows how a classic heart attack occurs. There's a buildup of cholesterol and calcium causing a plaque in the arteries supplying the heart, the coronary arteries. This causes a narrowing and reduced blood supply to the heart muscle, so reduced oxygen supply to the heart muscle, which can cause it to die. So when heart muscles died, you have had a heart attack. The lower bit, the second part of this diagram, talks about microvascular disease. So these are the disease in the very small vessels of the heart. And this can be due to a plaque, like above, or due to spasm of the vessels. So there's nothing blocking it, but they're going sort of up and down, affecting the blood flow. And this type of heart attack is more common in women. Thanks, Nikki. And this slide just briefly illustrates how the vessels look different in men and women. So you can see on the side with the men's vessel there, you have a larger plaque causing more obstruction of blood flow to the heart, so more of a blockage. Whereas in women, they don't tend to have that same sort of obstruction. And as I said, most of the problems with blood supply is due to a plaque sort of breaking off and throwing down a little blockage into the small vessels, or this spasm of the arteries. Thank you. So what can we do? So there are some risk factors for heart disease that we can do something about. Some we can't, like age and our genetics, but there are many that we can do something about. So things like smoking, obesity, so our weight, not exercising, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and diabetes all increase your likelihood of having cardiovascular disease. And there's evidence of the socioeconomic impacts of cardiovascular disease as well. So poor healthcare access, lack of education on heart health and healthy lifestyle, access not much access to a variety of food sources, so poor nutrition, poor housing, and stress, among other factors, increase our likelihood of having cardiovascular disease. So often rural communities are disadvantaged for a number of factors, but socioeconomic factors are particularly important, and that means that they have an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. And some of these risk factors that I've mentioned have different impacts on men and women. So smoking, for example, is associated with a greater risk of first heart attack in women compared to men. Diabetes is also associated with a higher risk of heart disease in women compared to men. So this here is something that we use to calculate your heart risk over the next 10 years, your cardiovascular risk over the next 10 years. So we put in lots of data, which you can see in the grey screen there. So your cholesterol at the bottom, your height, your weight to calculate your BMI, and whether you smoke, and various other factors. We put this into a calculator, and this gives a percentage score. If you score 10 or more percent, then your GP, your doctor, might start to have a discussion with you about starting cholesterol lowering medication, so something like a statin, to help reduce your risk of a heart attack, cardiovascular disease in the future. Thank you. So what can we do? Can you do? So as I said at the beginning, I think a move to preventative medicine is really important. So don't just go when you have a problem. Let's try and prevent what could happen. Let's try and control these risk factors before something serious occurs. So see your doctor, have your blood pressure checked, have your weight and your height checked so your body mass index, your BMI, can be calculated. And perhaps have a discussion about whether maybe you should have some blood tests, a screen for diabetes, maybe it runs in your family, and check your cholesterol. And it also gives your doctor an opportunity to talk to you about lifestyle things, like stopping smoking if you smoke, and improving your diet, and increasing your exercise. So thanks, Nikki. And what can you do if you can't get to a doctor? So a lot of women in rural communities don't have easy access to a doctor, but there are some things that they may be able to do. You can purchase perhaps a blood pressure monitor yourself and measure your blood pressure at home. We do home blood pressure monitoring here. So you can take blood pressure 3 times in the morning over half an hour resting, and record the lowest reading, and the same in the evening for 7 days, and calculate an average. And if your average is below 135 over 85 millimeters of mercury, then you've got good control of your blood pressure. But if it's above that, then that's a sign that you should be seeing your doctor. Do you have high blood pressure? Does it need treatment? We don't want you to have untreated high blood pressure, because that increases your risk of cardiovascular disease. Similarly, you may have access to some scales. Someone in the community might have some scales, so you can weigh yourself and see, perhaps calculate your body mass index, and see if that's high. So we should be aiming for between 20, BMI of 20 and 25 in Caucasians, and slightly lower, 18 to 23, in minority ethnic groups. If it's above this, then you're again at high risk of cardiovascular disease. It might be difficult to get to a doctor's, but there is now more of a push for remote clinics and telemedicine. So it may be that you can talk to a doctor about some of the readings that you've found at home, and they can give you advice. And education is a big thing. So attending webinars like this, really important for education and spreading the word amongst people who perhaps don't have access in the same way. There are online leaflets and resources, charities, Heart Foundation charities, groups and forums to discuss things. You might be worried about your risk of heart disease. Maybe it runs in the family. It's good to talk these through with a healthcare professional. And again, diet. If we move on to the next slide, there's an Eat Well guide that I use with my patients. So that little diagram on the one side of the slide there shows what we should be aiming for. So half a plate of vegetables or legumes, a quarter of protein, and a quarter of carbohydrates. And I say this to my patients, but I realised not that long ago that actually people don't necessarily know what a carbohydrate is. So this guide I find really useful. So maybe cut down on that bread and that pasta. I also realised that some people don't eat bread and pasta, and they have other carbohydrates in their diet because they come from a different cultural background. So if we move to the next slide, the Eat Well team have produced these that are more relevant for people of different ethnic groups. And I found this really helpful, particularly with the community that I work with, to identify what's a carbohydrate, what do they need to cut down on, what can they increase on to make sure they're eating healthily. If you eat meat, fish twice a week, oily fish twice a week is good. Reducing salt, reducing processed foods, and reducing alcohol if you drink alcohol. So briefly on exercise, I have a lot of patients come to see me who say, well, I'm on my feet all day, doctor, I'm running around, I don't stop, I'm cleaning the house, I'm doing all the chores and I'm rushing to work. I can't possibly exercise anymore. But actually what's really important is that we exercise for at least a minimum of 150 minutes a week, but it needs to increase our heart rate. So we may well be rushing around, but it might not be intense enough. The intensity of exercise should be moderate intensity. So it should at least increase our heart rate for it to be effective to protect us from cardiovascular disease. So that's really important to pass on that information to friends, that actually we need to be exercising to a degree to exercise our heart muscle. Like any other muscle in the body, it needs exercise. Okay, thank you. So this is a slide which shows how a heart attack presents in men and women. It's different. So perhaps we've all read the books, seen the films with people with crushing chest pain on the left-hand side, bending over and the pain going down their left arm. This is also how we first learned it at medical school when I was at medical school back then. But we now know that actually women present very differently. And actually, this difference can mean that we can miss a heart attack in a woman. So women might present with dizziness, extreme fatigue, atypical chest pains, bit of nausea, anxiety. And actually, the other symptoms, even if there is a bit of chest pain present, maybe feel more important to them than the chest pain. So they might not even mention the chest pain to their doctor. They might just say, oh, I'm extremely tired, I'm feeling a bit sick and I feel a bit dizzy and short of breath. And the chest pain might not even feature. So it's important to have a high suspicion of a heart attack in a woman because they might not be presenting with these classic symptoms. If you develop these symptoms, it's really important to get to a hospital with heart care available as soon as possible. And I appreciate that for a lot of our women in rural communities, this may be difficult, but time is muscle. So as soon as you think, okay, I could be having a heart attack, or my friend might be having a heart attack, you need to do whatever you can in your power to get them to a heart centre. When you're there, you'd have an ECG and blood tests. If these look like you're having a heart attack, we'd go on to do an angiogram, which I'll explain on the next slide, is where we put a dye into a big vessel and essentially look for blockages. So here you can see the white arrows are pointing out where there's some obstruction, some blockage in the heart vessels there, which is affecting the heart muscle and causing a heart attack. Now, you may remember what I mentioned right at the beginning, or of the cardiovascular disease part at least, that women may not have these big blockages. And actually, now we know that you can have a heart attack with a normal coronary angiogram, so non-obstructive coronary arteries. And this is because of the vasospasm that we see in some people. So it means that, again, on diagnosis of a heart attack might be more difficult in women because the angiogram, this test, might be normal. Okay, thank you. So finally, I'd like to end with talking about what initiatives there are to promote women's health generally. These are a lot of initiatives that have been promoted by the Women's Healthcare Strategy in England, but they're applicable globally, and you can try and incorporate these into your communities as much as you can. What we've had recently is the creation of women's health hubs. So this is sort of a one-stop clinic where you have smear tests, mammograms, checking for breast cancer, contraception consultations, HRT consultations, all in one place. And And this has really benefited women because they're not rushing around from one place to another, not seeing this going to the family planning service for their contraception, going to the GP to talk about HRT, going to the hospital for their mammogram, and going to another unit for their smear test. So this has increased uptake in preventative medicine for women's health, makes it a lot easier for them to be able to complete these really important tests and have these important consultations. We know that mobile clinics are really helpful for those in rural communities. So bringing these women health hubs closer into these rural communities can increase uptake, and also virtual hubs for can't leave that. They've talked about improving access to contraception. So currently, after a woman has given birth in the UK, they have a check with their GP, their family doctor, at 6 weeks. And that's when we tend to talk about contraception. But what we hope to have a move to is actually talking about this when women have their baby and are being discharged from hospital with their new baby. Because a lot of women don't know that they can ovulate between 21 to 28 days after having a baby, even if they're exclusively breastfeeding. So there can be unplanned pregnancies with a very short interval between the pregnancies, because they may fall pregnant in this very early time after giving birth because they weren't aware that they could fall pregnant so quickly. Also, having those discussions when you have women in front of you, taking that opportunity is really important, because that woman might not be able to come to their 6-week check with the GP. They might be too busy, their baby might be unwell, and it's difficult if you're looking after children to make that time for yourself. HRT is something that I think as healthcare professionals we're becoming much better at. I think there's still a lot of room for improvement. There's improving education in healthcare professionals is a big drive, improving access to patients to talk about it. And also in the UK, there's now a prepayment method for HRT. So the cost of HRT is much reduced compared to a normal prescription over a year now. Finally, at the beginning, I said we don't have many research trials on women, and this is affecting how we manage diagnosis, treatment for women. So we need to encourage women to participate in research. And on the next slide, the Lancet have produced a poster on ways we can increase women participating in cardiovascular trials. Essentially, removing barriers, making a bit more flexible for women to attend, help maybe with transportation, arranging childcare, finding out from women who may have signed up to the trials what they felt about it, what motivated them to do it, and really encouraging women to sort of take healthcare for women forward for the future. Okay, so in summary, I've talked about women's health and why there's such a big disparity between healthcare for men and women. I've talked about cardiovascular disease and what you can do in your communities to help modify risk factors, and have raised awareness on how heart attacks can present differently in men and women. I've talked about initiatives some initiatives to improve women's health, and these can be adapted for rural communities. And I hope I've encouraged some of you to consider enrolling in trials when they become available, so we can jointly improve our understanding and management of women's healthcare for the future. Next slide, Nikki, please. So these are my references. And next slide, please. I'm very grateful for having been invited to present to you today. And I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Louise Newlands. This was absolutely brilliant. I am very excited about all this incredible information that we're having. I'm here with my notepad, taking notes, and I really, really loved all the cards as well. Very like translating all this difficult and complex information in a language that is a bit more universal and that we can all understand even without having a degree, big doctor. So thank you so much. I'll hand over straight to our audience who's been really amazing, dropping the questions and comments in the chat. Thank you so much, everyone. I saw that there was a hand up just before Dr. Louise started her presentation. If this person, of if anyone wants to come in, we also have the opportunity of having you sharing with us on live on the microphone. So if anyone again wants to raise their hands, otherwise I'll go straight to the questions. Okay, thank you. I see my team ACWW helping me with the moderating the chat, so shout out to them as well. Okay, we have a few questions. So the first one is, how can I bring up that I have been feeling low with my friends or family if we haven't really spoken about it before? I guess this question is for Dr. Clara O'Reilly.
Yeah, I think a really, really, kind of common way to be feeling, sometimes it can be quite daunting, knowing how to communicate that, knowing where to start. And that means that we do put it off. But I think a helpful way to approach it might be, consider one or two people that maybe you feel particularly close with, or maybe kind of have a bit more open communication with, and simply use those words. Just say, I'm feeling low. Um, you know, Once those words are out there, then you guys can think about what maybe you need. And I think that can sometimes help that other person as well. It might be, I'm feeling low and I need to be heard and listened to, or I'm feeling low, I maybe need some help with figuring out my way through this. And I think that can sometimes help not only you feel a bit more comfortable with, I guess, what you're looking for from that conversation, but also for the other person to know how they can best kind of help you with that. But yeah, I hope that that kind of helps, going for it, letting that out, and once their words are out there, then you can figure out what comes next.
Thank you. I'm going to pick up on one of the last questions that is in the box, just because it's still for you, Clara. So we go on the
Yeah,
same mental health.
definitely.
So thank you for the talk on well-being. I find it hard to realize when I'm feeling low, when there is so much to do. How can I do things to help when it doesn't feel like I can stop?
Again, I think that's from my work, one of the most kind of common kind of things I hear is that, like, I'm so busy, there is no time to do this, to kind of substitute stuff in. Um, and I think, number one, realizing maybe when you're feeling low, it can be really tricky sometimes. It's that other people reflect that to us. They kind of say, I'm feeling like, maybe you're a bit more irritable, or it could be because of you're sleeping a bit more, or kind of feeling more tired. So sometimes, yeah, we do maybe need other people to reflect that to us. Um, but also maybe kind of thinking about how you can do things to help when it doesn't feel like you can stop. you know, there's something I call kind of the 5 second rule, or the 5 minute rule. And getting started on that well-being journey, it doesn't mean that, you have to block out, 2 hours, once a week to lean into this. It could simply be taking 5 minutes at the end of a day, maybe before you go to bed, to do something that brings you some enjoyment, maybe do something that you find relaxing, just dotting those things throughout the week. They do accumulate over time. Um, and yeah, again, I know it can feel really tricky and really overwhelming, but picking the kind of those small moments here and there, building it in, and yeah, before you know it, there'll be that scaffolding around you to kind of hold you. So I hope that's, I guess, helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Clara. And to Dr. Louise now, some questions about heart health. So, what if my blood pressure is high one day, but not every time I check at home?
That's a good question. So we try and look at an average of blood pressures. So one thing you can do is keep a home blood pressure diary, looking at your average. So as I said, three in the morning and recording the lowest, and again 3 in the evening when you've been relaxing for about half an hour, and record the lowest and work out the average of these and see if it's above that 135/85. If that's difficult or you don't have a blood pressure monitor, you may have access to a 24-hour blood pressure monitor, which some pharmacies and hospitals here can issue. So you wear a monitor for 24 hours, and that takes an average of your blood pressure, and that will give you a better marker of what your blood pressure is really doing, because blood pressure can go up at times of stress or if you're rushing, and that's a normal response. So we really want to know what your average is, and the 24-hour blood pressure monitor is the best way of doing that. But if that's not accessible, then home monitoring is also good.
Thank you. And there's another questions around heart attack. So do all of the list of symptoms show if it's a heart attack?
So no. So there are even things called silent heart attacks. You don't have any symptoms. These are more common in people who have diabetes, and people get a different variation of symptoms. So the classic symptom is chest pain, but as I said, that's actually more common in men, and they can be quite differing presentations of symptoms, so dizziness, feeling very sick and sweaty. So it's important if you feel unwell and have a bit of a niggly chest pain, to see your doctor. But if you have no pain at all, but you're feeling really unwell, it is still important to see a doctor, because the silent heart attacks do exist.
And there's another question. How many days do I need to record to get the average before I go to the doctor if I'm recording at home?
So 7 days is pretty good, a week.
Okay. So there are no other questions in the Q&A. I'm just checking the chat, and I'm amazed to see the amazing participation for our audience. I love one comment that said, friends can be observant. Going back to mental health, friends can be observant and listen to what their friend is not saying. So being also there for the people that we care about, the people in our community, of what is not said but doesn't feel quite right maybe to us, and check on the people that are around us that we care about. So thank you so much. Thank you for all the people that were attended this webinar. Thank you so much to our guest for today, Dr. Louise Newlands and Dr. Clara O'Reilly. I want to tell our audience that you will receive more information about this session, so don't worry, you will have their contacts and some extra information around what's been shared today. I think this webinar had really put forward the importance of both mental health and heart wellness, that it's the key to an overall well-being for women. So thank you so much for this amazing webinar. If anyone wants to add anything, maybe from our guest speakers.
Just want to thank you guys so much for having me, letting me come and speak about something that's, a real passion of mine. And yeah, we are strong, we're incredible as women, but we also deserve breaks and deserve to prioritize ourselves. So yeah, thank you so much again.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I'd echo the same. Thank you very much for inviting me. I've thoroughly enjoyed speaking, and I hope I've shared some information that may be of some use to some of you.
Thank you. And once again, to the audience, your participation really helps make session like this so meaningful. So thanks a lot for your comments and discussions in the chat while our guests were presenting. And just a reminder that in 30 minutes, we're having our next sessions about ACWW celebration. So you don't want to miss on that one. Should be a link in the chat, or shortly there should be, to register to join that sessions. And I hope I will see you there in 30 minutes. Thank you so much. Thank you.